So, quick disclaimer, I do not have a degree in biomechanics, and I'm probably not the best OSU player out there, but what I can say is that I have a solid amount of experience with both. So with that out of the way, here's what I learned from studying tapping technique in OSU. From my observation of top players, there's 6 noticeable motions that are used for tapping. Inward and outward rotation of the hand, flexion and extension of the wrist, and flexion and extension of the fingers. Top players generally have very little movement, so it's kind of hard for me to tell what's actually happening, but here are some of the trends that I noticed. The fingers take on majority of the movement, but a slight rotational movement of the forearm seems to favor death streams and consistency. Also, a more exaggerated wrist movement is generally used for finger control, like galloping on bursts, transitioning from jumps to streams, or switching from single tapping to alternating. So to keep tapping speed consistent for a stream, the downstroke and the upstroke have to be around the same speed. If you tap harder, this makes the downstroke faster, but also makes the upstroke slower due to the excess downward momentum in your finger. This can be remedied by using the wrist to support the upward movement, but as mentioned earlier, this kind of tapping is mostly used for finger control and difficult reading sections. So basically, in a stream, it's less about how little or how much force you use, and more about if you can control the amount of force. And to prevent injury, it's much better to try and use as little force as possible. So offloading is something that's talked about by a lot of top players, but as a 6-digit OSU player, I honestly never really understood it. But after looking into tapping a little more, my theory is that offloading is done because of unfamiliar amounts of strain, as opposed to overstrain. As explained earlier, a stream is a pretty complex compound movement. It requires your forearm muscles to be working at different strengths and different timings. But because the muscles don't tire equally, the differences in strain will cause inconsistencies in technique, and eventually finger lock. To combat this, players can tense one of the muscles to stabilize it and stop it from being used. Essentially, your body will naturally do this because it's more familiar with going close to full strength as opposed to going at like 12.345% strength or something like that. But keep in mind that using more strength in your muscle means more stress on your tendon, and this can result in injury. So what should you stabilize when offloading? To be honest, offloading is bad and you shouldn't really do it, but if you have to, then it kind of depends on the situation and your preference. But one thing to note is that some players stabilize more than one thing. So for example, Eterna mostly stabilizes his wrist, but also leans towards double tapping just a little bit. And in some plays, he actually just goes full double tap. So with this knowledge in mind, I performed an experiment where I'd work on and think about mostly technique while playing. But I wouldn't stop playing unless I actually felt pain or I got bored. Keep in mind that I would normally play for like 4 to 5 hours a day. So here is what my play sessions were going to look like. I'd do dynamic hand stretching for 5 minutes, then warm up on extremely low BPM stream maps with autopilot. Basically, I'd focus completely on technique, trying to correct the amount of force I'm using and doing the correct movements, without worrying about accuracy or hitting notes. If you've ever played QWOP, it kind of feels like that, but with your own body. Then after that, I'd transfer my technique into my play by playing stream maps that I'm comfortable on. This is basically just a map that I don't need to offload on. And then afterwards, I'd keep playing comfortable BPMs, but on longer maps and longer streams until I felt like my technique was consistent. And then I would slowly raise the BPM as I play until I find a BPM that I finger lock streams on. Lastly, I would just play for fun. At this point in time, I was really enjoying stream maps, so that's what I ended up playing. And even after just the first day, I felt like I could actually play for way more than like 6 or 7 hours. But at that point, I was pretty bored, so I stopped playing, and then I'd end off the day with just some static hand stretches and massage. Well, I accidentally hit 2 of my goals in about a month. I got 200 pp on a stream map, and I got an A rank on image material. My comfort BPM increased from 160 to 195, but I think the biggest improvement was my reading and finger control. The entire process of training technique is essentially just finger control, but having such good technique that I don't even have to think about offloading, injury, or tapping the correct speed makes it so much easier to just focus on reading the map. After this, I intentionally reverted back to using bad technique. And from this, I could immediately realize the direct causes of Osu tapping injury. Overuse of single tendons from offloading too much or too often, and then tendons absorbing shock from tapping too hard. These two things cause very slight pains during gameplay, but now that I knew what tapping was supposed to feel like, I could actually recognize these pains. If you tap properly, you won't get injured. Now I could say that this is the correct way to get better at Osu, and it would actually kind of make sense. I mean, injury is just a roadblock to playing more. But there's one thing I learned from this experience that goes beyond just Osu, and that's that I got better when I made myself better. I originally just thought that I would get better at streams as I played them because that's what people would usually say. But what I realized is that when it comes to learning or improving, everyone will face a different set of problems. So it's better to focus on what's stopping me from reaching my goal rather than how other people reached my goal. Just tapping on my keyboard didn't make me better at tapping, and just playing on streams didn't make me better at streams. I had to actually make the conscious connection between my hand and my brain. Don't get me wrong, good maps and tapping exercises are great tools for getting better, but at the end of the day, you're the one that determines what your tools do. Alright, if you're hearing this, I just want to say thanks for sticking till the end. This is my first video of this kind, so if you have any criticism or questions, I would appreciate a comment. And if you like the video, like and sub because I plan on making more, maybe even with some other games. And I also plan to stream on Twitch, so you can follow me there and talk to me in chat. So, yeah, I don't really know how to end the video. Like, the script ending was already